As the postman delivered the letter video, I heard the director say, The map! There was no death certificate. They hanged a picture in front of me. Louise, look into my eyes, she said. I read the patient's notes. Items, DNA, no match. No measurements. No criminal. No crime. No DNA shows XY. And I looked at the prologue. It said, cross conventional lines to see what happened since I had come to Earth. You amaze me, you writers, the director said. May I remind you, Errol? See what happened. Since we came to Earth, I had come to terms with it. The pirate, the medical name I used, she understood. We killed her. She helped me. She believed in the church. Why not call the police? I was a witness for the prosecution. The film I witnessed when we wired up the house. Detective Sergeant Edmondson. I ran the film in the lab, watched the mouths, listened to the voices, wrote down the transcript and read it out in the courtroom. Today you have heard it. Our affidavit. That's what the message of torment in her eyes conveyed to me momentarily in the glaze of the afternoon sun at the parade. The clock's hand on the ground past noon, and the cadets filed round, and you stood on the podium taking your salute with William, baton in hand, having removed from under your arm like a baboon, standing like a statue in a monsoon oblivious to all, cocooned by an invisible wall. She said... Sardonically, Sir Keith replied, Diana, do you mind? This is a celebration of the graduation of my boy. Peter said, no insults, Mother, please. Why? Lady Sampson said. She quickly paused and then to Sir Keith turned. You had weathered the storm. We, all of us, had been pawns. As the cadets had come round, Peter in front of them, her face had suddenly transformed. It had dropped its veil and revealed the crazed grin of a devastated dawn. In the hand of this madam was this newspaper that she clutched in her paw and struck me across the cheek and the face as she was carried off, sprawled, and... like an open headline that rocketed itself into my head, I saw the words, machine guns, all dead. Was headlined, prostitutes at the college, Michael Cameron at the barracks, killer now dead. I saw she picked up the newspaper. As I watched in the television that presented itself. There it is, she said. There it is, and threw it on the table. Will you not read it? She asked, askance. Brigadier General Sampson looked at her quietly as if she was mad. Will you not heed it? She said. Quietly, Sir Keith said, I heed nothing but the officer corps. Lady Sampson replied, God knows, and dropped in her armchair. It says, she said to Sir Keith, Michael Cameron suicides, and she paused, and then she went on. It says, reads, in Brixton Prison. I felt, as I heard her now, she paused again, and saying it as if off by heart, she said, Cadet in inquiry, Soundhurst into machine guns use in Russian roulette, dies in cell. And Sir Keith quietly said, I know. And Peter looked up frozen. I thought I could hear the police, the ambulance arriving. But still, dryly, Sir Keith said, I don't think the public should be let into these places when we have parades. Lady Sampson, why was he not there? She challenged him. Sir Keith, it should be enshrined in a principle of law, that is a canon of behaviour, to prevent civilian infringement into army precincts. They don't understand. Eyes fixed on him, staring, Lady Sampson said, What occurred? Sir Keith looked at her. and said, "Is that an order disguised as a question requiring an answer, that if I refuse I'll be shot at dawn?" Peter said, "Mother, father." Lady Sampson replied, and as if standing in the middle of the lounge room and defiant. She said, "We're living under a curfew that's psychological, and if we are to lift it, we are to know why conclusions, records of the inquiry were suppressed by..." The final solution. This letter appeared in the Brighton and Hove Independent on August the 23rd, 2013. Here is an excerpt. What causes this? The public are sick and tired of no results, failure, inevitable politics. Adler? Vanity. People who live their lives in vanity, according to Adler, they live their lives in expectation of great triumphs, but vanity is not good form. It forms a pretense. That's what Adler says it does. It forms a pretense to disguise its real motives. For example, national interest, doing it for your own country. But vanity pursues its aims with great intensity and violence. Vanity is master of disguises. It goes underground, presents a face, pretends to be a pal, a regular kind of guy. A masquerade, a pretense. Vanity wants achievement. For example, person in this position realizes he can either take the road to achievement and do it by harming others and disguising it behind a pretense of good government and for your own country, or he could do it without harming others and employ a diplomatic method, negotiate. Of course, this would involve dismissing leaders who failed and replacing them with diplomats who can succeed. Vanity hasn't learned to appreciate. It descends into a vicious circle. It needs ego boosting and continuing the role play and being needed. It never breaks the vicious circle and creates situations and issues where it can employ itself in extraordinary self-aggrandizement. By doing this, vanity leaves itself open to blackmail, perpetuation. Why do we vote for image and not essentials? Afghanistan, Iraq, endless images on television in undeclared wars of children blown to death have led us, the voters, the public, to considerations way past leaders' images. Are they error-programmed by colleges? Oxford? Cambridge? Schizophrenic? Pathological? Freud's explanation. Sex. In scene 2, I saw They changed, and them again. There they were. Sir Keith, he said, the Garden of Eden, that's to where we've got to return before Adam and Eve took off their veils that covered their loins. Lady Sampson said, to reveal? Sir Keith replied, the kingdom of hell, and Lady Sampson said, Peter, you're quiet. Peter have said, there's a death knell, a shadow over this house. It is the ghost of Mary Cameron and her brother Michael. This is the villa of the damned. I didn't tell. It was Satan. In the lower areas of the ranks there was a smell, and it rose after reading D.H. Lawrence, and his influence gave way to the prostitution that infiltrated. So Keith, continuing to look down, said quietly, in England? He went on. In his defence, I should say that he uncovered nature as a connoisseur of experience that dictates the interrelation of the species that's origin is male/female. But it seems to me that he let his genitalia get in his way of seeing through a sensual maze that would take him to the spirit that he sought but always managed to evade. The Camerons were waylaid. They embraced his books and it denied them their parade. The high priest of sex reduced to life. He reduced life to spice and dust, cradled lust until it corroded away. Perhaps he was influenced by Freud. Lady Sampson glanced at him quickly and said, an interesting theory, but one that denies Mary. A high priestess conceived without any sex at all. The greatest genius, Jesus. Sir Keith didn't seem to alter his countenance and said, except in connecting with the hosts of the holiest of spirits, the process of Joseph was complementary, I am sure. Pause. The silence was embarrassing as Peter broke it and said quietly, Mary, I knew. I knew you did, dear. Lady Sampson suddenly looked up at him. Peter. Mary was wonderful, he said. She was an artist, a poetess. Lady Sampson seemed to be reading the newspaper now and said, it says here, the inquiry, they're going to reopen. Sir Keith, ignoring her, said, I would have thought she'd have something more to contribute, Peter. We're deliberately attempting to breed something more than an armoury of parrots, you know. Do you think this fellow Lawrence was the origin of it all? Or do you think that we have bottled up, and he liberated it by opening the neck of our emotions so that we could breathe sex? That's the nub of the inquiry, Peter said. Succeed, Sir Keith said. That's in what we believe. At all costs, we're in a materialistic society and you're nothing unless you come out on top. The ego grieves unless it succeeds. That is a lesson I've learned. It's a pity, but there it is. He looked to Lady Sampson and said, didn't make the rules, did we? I noticed she did not react. She didn't react. Sir Keith went on. There's no room for failures. Even if you're a poet, you've got to be a laureate and act competitively to call on the family tree to marshal genetically. And if you've got a true investment of genes, you can succeed, topped up with the right conditioning, which is what we're here to provide at the college. But these boys, these poets, they have no hide. They're willy-nilly, lily-white. They're cowards. They come out with their hands up. Don't depend on it, Peter said. No matter what, Sir Keith went on, something went wrong in the barracks on that night. There was a breakdown of communications. Everything had been taught, failed to be taken in or didn't connect inside the brain. And there was a spark triggered by drink that sent one of them insane. And he started firing and blew out her brains. It was for this that he paid, Sir Keith said. But an inquiry, our decision has been made. I ask you, reopen. Michael Cameron was guilty. problem is there's a conflict between a duty to be fair that's imposed mentally on the British and their emotions that are naturally inclined to anger because of this obligation, when they really want to shoot up and go insane. With the French, it's reverse. Touché, Peter said. Sir Keith went on. That's what happened that night, I suspect. The bottle uncapped. It exploded. Lady Sampson said quietly. So the prostitute was murdered. She looked thoughtful. So was I, she went on, who thought twice. Entering the barracks in any circumstances. What made them different? Sir Keith answered. It was like an overflow, an avalanche. The barracks were buzzing. They were reacting, repelling. Cameron had them yellow. He had beatings that were organised to beat out of them their training and orchestrate their bleatings. Bleatings they were, Mamma, they went on. They were made to parade naked, to display themselves in some mumbo-jumbo psychiatric latest fashionable manner that was enabled to deem them of behaviour that had relieved their demons. But the explosion was on its way. Such exhibitions were merely ephemeral. They gave no lasting remedy. The men were aware. They announced their discontent with a blast of the bugle. Da-da-da-da-da. Blast of the bugles? Lady Sampson said. You think I jest? Sir Keith said to her, facing her and puce and blowing out the words at her. Sergeants entered the mess. They found prostitutes dancing the Charleston with the soldiers to Jean Gruber. This is our day. Bugle call rag, they said, was all the rage. This seemed a demonstration of coagulation with long-dead music, with their generation an obsession with a dead generation. So they were dressed like Dionysius. It seemed ineffectual and yet won. What? Peter said. Yes, Lady Sampson said. One prostitute was 40, Sir Keith answered, observing, as if reliving it in the present. She had a figure like Mary's. There was silence. These boys were 24 down to 19, nothing more or less. Some of them were 16. They seemed to be in rehearsal, searching. Lady Sampson said, for the love ritual? Sir Keith answered, the army is their eternal love. Lady Sampson looked at him squarely. Baloney, she said. It has no emotion. Sir Keith regarded her. What a twist of the knife. Lady Sampson said, these boys are all being made into thugs. Sir Keith answered, we'll see. Some of them have to think. Within a certain perimeter of limitation which we are privileged to reach, we teach, so that they can be the best in leadership. What do you think I am? A neuter? An automaton? I'm at the peak. Lady Sampson said, take a good look at yourself. You're producing people who conform to an image. Whom? Montgomery? Foch? Clausewitz? Rommel? Anyone who'll win. Who? T.E. Lawrence of Arabia? D.H. Soldier's twin? Anyone but themselves. Anyone who'll but think. A follower of policy. That's what you've developed. And there's no room for poets. The best leadership can't function without a grounding in the classics. Foch, Lawrence, Clausewitz, Monty, they all knew that. I've read them. I took more interest in them than you and your narrow view, Keith, because I cared. I love my son. So do I, Sir Keith said, but he's called to duty, he completed. Lady Sampson said, not as a memory that has no originality, replied Sir Keith. Put them through the initiation. Life is an obstacle course. If they want any compassion, they can go to the chapel and get religion. That's what I've got it for, and that's what we've got it for. A system of categories is that on which we function. Define each ailment, each element, and then provide a solution in the hospital, the barracks, the chapel. Everything has its role, a time and place. Individual spirit? There's no place for that, except in war. Hear, hear, Peter cheered. What do you mean by that? Said Sir Keith. Peter said, just what I said. Hear, hear. Sir Keith replied, you've got a propensity for being rude. Peter said, sarcastic, I would say. Sir Keith replied, don't be smart, Alecky. Peter stood and said, I'll be what I please. He rose and, look, Father, he said, don't go dictating to me. I've graduated, I've completed, I've paid my dues. I'm a poet to you and the army. They thumb my nose. Adieu. Sir Keith looked at him fiercely. You don't have to reach Foch's generalismo status as yet, I'm willing to wait. See how you go. You can write poetry and practice soldiery contemporaneously, Peter said, "That's not what you said to Michael Cameron. What's changed you?" Sir Keith said, "He was different. His sister was fomenting." Peter replied, "I liked her. I didn't feel." Sir Keith replied, "She was a mystery. She wasn't of the balance that could produce a personality like Sir Philip Sidney. She was promiscuity herself, a pro with whom we're prepared to bear. Sir Philip Sidney in the army because he's the archetypal Englishman." Peter, smiling, said, "We've got modernisation now. Just what a sound, what a blaring sound in my ear. That blare." I heard the words, "Ring, ring." It sounded like the doorbell. And the scene 4 came in as I saw, and it said, "The lounge, Lady Sampson and Sir Keith present. Mixing a drink." Lady Sampson said, "They may come here." "Keep your head," Sir Keith said. "It's nothing to worry about. It seems years." Drink was affecting Sir Keith, I thought. "Tracks were all overlaid," he said. "There's nothing to be done. Just keep cool." Peter entered. "Hello, son," Sir Keith said. Peter looked to his mother. Sir Keith said, "We're just discussing—" "Mary?" Peter said. "Mary Cameron?" "She had shimmering hair," Peter went on, as if in a trance, as if entranced, as if he could see her. "She represented everything to me. I can remember it as if it was yesterday, and yet it's years. 7 years it seems. A lifetime or two of tears since we were separated and she was sent away. Michael always said she'd come back, and she has. Today I've no idea why she disappeared. You remember the police investigated, Mum. She was my Sonia. I saw him as he fell to his knees before his mother." As she went on, looking down at him, quietly holding her drink by the stem, the glass, she whispered, "She was registered as a missing person. We befriended. They were orphans. We took them under our wing." She ran her fingers through Peter's hair as he kneeled before her. His arm rose and he clutched round the top area of her thigh and pulled her close to him, and his palm of his hand on her bottom. His tears were mixing into the material of her dress, the tapestry, the fabric. As Sir Keith said quietly, "Also, I was surprised. The army gave him a home, and look how he's repaid." Lady Sampson said, "I never thought things would turn out like this." Peter, tears were crying down the insides of her thighs through the fabric of her dress now. He went on and clutched her, held her by the bottom on the side, on the left, and pressed her close to him, inside of her thighs. With his lips he seemed to kiss as he said. She had a way of presenting things. He unleashed a creativity in me. Poetry flowed from my veins. I could write as though a flood came. Since then, Mum, I've never seen beauty. It's come. I've come to believe that every day she lives." He stretched forward and felt his shoulders against her. I could see as he completed his words. She would be 23. She taught me that there was a life beyond the grave. "I've got a fair way to go yet, son," Lady Diana said. Diana Sampson she was. "Beyond. You're not dead yet, son." She ran her hand through his hair and gripped his head and pressed him to her closer. In the area between her thighs she held him. As I cried and watched, and Sir Keith stood like stone looking ahead. twirling his drink slowly. And Peter said, crying, "Army's a tyranny, Mother." Keith said, awesomely, awfully. That's a strange way to celebrate the day you graduated. Sir Keith looked suspicious as he mocked, not looking to them. As Lady Diana, Lady Divine she was now, rubbed and pushed Peter's face into her area between the thighs at the top, and I could swear she would come to. But no, I heard Sir Keith say, without looking at them, "Are you becoming existentialist? Have you been reading too much Jean-Paul Sartre? Are you an anarchist, son? It's poisoning the ranks. You're a systematic victim of your mother, aren't you? The poetess? She seduced you. You've been seduced into the army's process. That's adversity that has produced your character, that's enabled you to rise up and become a poet and defy me. Are you not a soldier who's got stomach in his belly?" "Yes," Peter said. "A hell I was in had no end, but now it has." Sir Keith suddenly turned slightly. "Pete," he said, "you've been given every chance. You were given every chance. You had a life. You've got a life. That's permanent. That's what I dread," Peter said. "Every step I took on that parade was another nail in my coffin," he said, suddenly buried his head in his hands and withdrew it from his mother's between her legs. "Oh, if Mary were only here," he said, "I could transfer it." "Understand, Mother, don't you?" "Yes," she said. "That woman was whom you said. Why do you not bring her here? She was my friend." "Because she's dead," said Sir Keith. "Dead, as if she were a being who never did exist." He turned suddenly now to Peter directly and said, "You're in the army now, my boy. There's no room for her." "Why?" Peter said. "Because Mary died." Sir Keith said, "Do you not remember? We told you. Your mother said." Peter replied. Sir Keith looked at Lady Diane Sampson, Lady Sampson, coldly and said, "Mother is obsessed by the resurrection. She's a rocket on the moon with so much booze she'll beat Jules Verne and transfigure the time machine of H.G. Wells. She's been drinking all day. She's been celebrating. She's mistaken. This newspaper report, it's rubbish. She's associating an event. She's disassociating as well at the same time. My voice, as if a circle went round and round and took her soul in it with it. Michael Cameron suiciding. It's just a routine occurrence. People have a duty to inquire and find out if they can form a jury, and the police can present evidence to it, to them, the court, to everything. It'll pass. You're a raffish lieutenant now, aren't you? Get on with it, a dandy. Shake you by the shoulders and the head. If I could just unglue you from your mother," he said, and took a drink. Drink. He was drinking now. As Peter chimed in and said, "I liked him. I liked Michael Cameron ever since we were kids. He and I grew into the army. We did it together." Now he was looking away from his mother's eyes, talking to his father, Sir Keith. He, still on his knees, still holding his mother at her side. Did it together, he said, our careers, our plans, as if Mary Cameron was legitimising it. Michael Cameron was a poet. She said that all the army these events were fuel upon which we would feed, to blast our poetry into smithereens, when he and I made a whole soul in the forefront of the galaxy. Mother, why can't I speak? She ran her hand through his hair, his fingers, and said, "It's breaking up. This magic, it's working. This serum, it's going through you. This serpentine's, it's breaking up the cement." As Peter went on, the forefront of the galaxy for everyone to see, and out of it the soul conceived. But Michael, he believed that Mary preached from a seed that would some day bleed all over him. He said he should have made a choice and not got back into the army, into the barracks, into the din, into the Galilee area, he called it. He should have left and gone and published his writings and pastoral ideas and never come back to the army again. Sir Keith, concerned, answered, "Cameron was perpetuating dissension in the ranks. It was entirely predictable that something untoward would happen. I blame myself for failing to intervene earlier. The signs, when they were appearing... Peter, are you all right? Pull yourself together." Psychology. Deception? Why do leaders say they'll do something at each election, get in and do the opposite? Answer? Do their parties take surveys, gather information, put it all in a script them, parrot the candidate, suit them, so that the effect is to position them so that they can give us what we want, and so present an image of what we say we want in the survey? Then as soon as they get in, they do the party's bidding. Ideas. A secret agenda. Failure should disqualify them. They should disqualify themselves. Poets, diplomatic negotiators should replace them. Both say they're doing it for their own country. Eventually I really believe it, and it gives me a license to kill. The end justifies the means. Because we're right. They're wrong. So, I'm not going to do it myself. Sickness diagnosis. Your role becomes your face. A thin layer of cement, a coffin, in Jung's symbols, a vanity, a veneer, a reputation. Plastic. I had to keep it intact. Ego boost. Prognosis. But I wasn't there. Your sickness is in him, distorted his good. You know your psychiatrists know. It causes amnesia. You don't know your own identity. You adopt their ID. Split. You forget. Prime Minister. Schizophrenic. And then you forget your original identity, your original aspiration. Your role play, it becomes second nature. And then you enter the maze, lose sight of your originality, forget. The boy dies. The original aspiration dies. The commodity clones. Your sickness was in him. Stem cell trial. I'll read all about it. Read all about it. I watched the scene sitting in my armchair before the television screen, looking at him, demented, damaged. His head, it shaked, it shivered, it shook. Shook? Tumour, metaphorically, I called it, with all due respect to those who have it. This one was a beast, a dreadful cause of insanity, and all the population shook. I looked through the bars to the flight into psychosis. Freud's idea crashed. President Ramirez. Teeth. What's that ether? What? I district court. Louise, court judges.
Visited with a psychiatric tremble.
You presume too much. There is no death certificate. Then, after 7 years of hell, the place was converted. Her face was her death knell. A death knell converted my hell, my soul. And I nursed her. Each personality. Each second, each day in bed, I nursed her. This hell that was within me tormented her, made me mad, set me off my head, my mask, my stem cell, I tell you, was blocked by this hell, this miserable hell, this girl woman put me in.
I had a psychiatric tremble.
It's too late to be choosy. He's got to be one or the other. He'll do. What does it matter if it's treason or murder? He's convicted. He's got the measurements. One or the other. He'll be classified, categorised. That's all. I hope you're right. I'll defer to you this time. Okay, detective. It's against my better judgment. They won't wait. We must have 10. Got 9. This is number 9. Number 10. Not up to us. They'll decide. If we don't, it's too late. He's in the transitional. That's all we care about. That's all we need know. Amen. The plane came down in West Sussex. Is that what they call it? It's the West. Are you sure he's got the measurements? Are you sure he's got the right measurements? He's got X. Look at the slide. You sure there's no further evidence of Y? The Y line. If there is, he's one of them who dies. No. Take another look. Take another X-ray. Take another X-ray. Take another slide. Click. Use the instrument that was given to us from the architect, the lab. Walls will come in. It doesn't matter, it's nothing to do with us. They're going to design a new... Well, put him in his cell between the walls. The walls will... An architect is going to come in. He's been appointed by the minister. Are you sure there's no evidence of why? No. Thought she said it was X. Not sure, really. It's a mark. He's disfigured. His face. I don't know what to call him. What ID? Well, I've got to enter him into this records book. Just enter him in. Just enter him. Can't speak very well today, can you, Sarge? This early hour of the morning? Just enter him in. He's X or Y or number 9 or 10. It doesn't matter. Throw him into his cell. The walls will come in. An architect is appointed by the minister. God, what are you two detectives doing? You'll be chief jailer for all the... You'll be chief jailer for all of the land. Stamp him! Well, you've got to use his ID for something. Bastard! I saw the patient's notes. What to do, God? I just don't know what to do. I had it once. Filthy disillusionment set in. Let me tell you, I had to provide formula once. Stem cell trial opens new era. Read all about it today. Read all about it. A new age of treatment began yesterday after the first person was enrolled in a pilot. Stamp him! Well, you've got to use his ID for something. Bastard! It's a door! William! Brigadier Williamson entered. He was led by Peter. He was the author of Hysteria. Keith! The inquiry! It's reopened! The police! They have visited! They found crates! They found evidence of, said Brigadier Williamson. He looked at Lady Sampson. Lady Sampson looked at him. Of what? She said. Of a body that's been mutilated. Brigadier Williamson said. Crushed, Lady Sampson looked away. As Brigadier Williamson went on. And said, they're examining everything. They found shreds, cotton specks of the things she wore. Shut up, Sir Keith said. Peter stood suddenly. Brigadier Williamson said, didn't you hide them carefully? Sir Keith replied, I did my duty as I saw fit to the army. The machine gun barrel's been uncovered, screamed Brigadier Williamson. I'm in the thick of it. recovered! Stained blood has been recovered! Didn't you crush and squeeze the life out of the apparel?" Sir Keith said suddenly quietly. Blood stains were ingrained. Cameron rushed and blew out her brains. Lady Cameron looked at them, wide-eyed. Sir Keith continued, "Before I could, Brigadier Williamson cut in. 'You were too late!' Sir Keith said, 'We've been through it time and time again.' Peter, half crazed, said, 'Dad, what's he saying?' Brigadier Henderson said, 'Williamson.' Brigadier Williamson said, 'Doesn't he know? Doesn't he know that Mary Cameron never died at all? He's obliterated,' Sir Keith said. 'She escaped,' Lady Sampson said. Sir Keith replied suddenly from where she was placed in the days when I estranged them. 'I arranged she was deranged.' He looked at Lady Sampson quickly. 'No, Diana, I must take the blame.' To Lady Diana, Peter said, 'You knew too?' 'I could not allow her influence,' Sir Keith said. 'She grew to a point where she was diverting you. I could only see my way clear to adopt one course of action and snatch her away from her, smash her hold over you. She was insane, and when I signed the papers, insured. That's how she was viewed.' 'But you know what you do,' Peter said. 'You continue. There's no end. You have to keep covering until I confess I hated her as well as I loved her too.' 'What?' Lady Sampson said coldly. 'Because she could not save me from myself and from you. All. That's what the army's here to do,' said Sir Keith. There was a pause. Peter forlornly said, "Michael was convicted. There was a prostitution racket. It gave vent to our feelings. They were playing Russian roulette. We had no future. A machine gun barrel was pointed. They were being smart aleck, placing a toe on the trigger with their head before the barrel." Suddenly Sir Keith cut in. "I entered, and one I saw was dressed in the clothes of a woman I recognised from the years ago as the one she had left when I had dispatched her from our home, escorted by officers of the Department for People who have lost their minds mentally. When Cameron lunged at the trigger and pulled it and shouted, 'Mary.' But it was Peter's voice. 'I killed her,' said Peter, devastated. Michael was framed. I saw suddenly Sir Keith held a telegram. He read it, and it said, in his words, 'A body discovered, sent all over England, contained in crates, heart dismembered, clothing enmeshed, identified as Mary Cameron's.' I saw Keith drop the telegram and say, inanely, 'Superintendent.' I heard a long ring at the door then. Ring! The Brigadier General went to answer it. I heard a young man's voice. 'Telegram!' Boom! Suddenly there was a terrific barrage. I saw the Brigadier General hurled in, and two men covering him with revolvers, and a superintendent. One of them was dressed like a postman. To my surprise, the others in plain clothes. 'Peter Samson, you bastard! Samson, get the words out, Superintendent,' he said. 'General Sir Keith Sampson? Brigadier Williamson? I have here warrants for your arrest.' There was a pause. A woman entered. She looked refreshed, well dressed, with the poise and dignity of a lady, as she walked slowly to centre stage. There she gazes emotionlessly. I heard Peter swear I heard him. Stunned, I looked at him as if he had seen a shark before him in the water and said, "Mary, you live."